The first blush of dawn painted the meticulously clipped edges of Oakwood Creek in shades of rose and gold. It was a light that seemed almost curated. Like everything else in the neighborhood, the identical. HOA-approved mailboxes standing sentinel by perfectly edged driveways. The uniform, shutters flanking spotless windows. The unnatural, deep green of lawns pampered with more chemicals than affection. Not a single blade of grass dared to defy the mandated 3-inch maximum height. Here, conformity wasn't just encouraged, it was enforced with the quiet, persistent pressure of a date-slow geological event. The air, thick with the scent of damp earth and blooming azaleas, carried the cheerful, almost offensively oblivious chirping of birds nesting in the ancient oaks that gave the neighborhood its name. It was a picture of suburban serenity, a carefully constructed diorama of the good life. But beneath the tranquil surface, like algae blooming unseen in a still pond, tensions festered. Carol Miller stood framed in her bay window, a sentinel surveying her domain. The lukewarm coffee in her favorite porcelain cup, bone china, naturally, remained largely untouched. Her gaze, sharp and practiced, swept the quiet street, missing nothing. A stray newspaper on Mr. Henderson's lawn, third time this month. The slight discoloration on the trim of the Petersons' garage door, a non-approved shade of beige, she suspected. A faint oil stain darkening the pristine concrete, where young Timmy Gable parked his ridiculous, oversized truck. Each imperfection was a tiny barb, snagging on the tightly woven fabric of her control. Her reflection stared back from the gleaming windowpane. Crisp white blouse, not a wrinkle, blonde hair sculpted into a helmet of immovable perfection, jaw set, lips thinned into a familiar line of disapproval. Today was patrol day, conducted, as usual, from the strategic vantage point of her living room. Oakwood Creek wasn't just where Carol lived. It was her project, her purpose, arguably her magnum opus. As president of the Homeowners Association for 5 increasingly autocratic years, she had molded it, shaped it, defended it against the perceived encroaching chaos of the outside world. The thick binder on her mahogany desk, crammed with bylaws, amendments, and violation notices, was her shield and her sword. She wielded its clauses with the unwavering conviction of a zealot. Order, standards, property values. These were her mantras, chanted silently as she scanned for transgressions. She hadn't always been like this, had she? There was a time, before Richard's promotion had brought them here, before the children had grown and left an echoing silence in the oversized house, when her focus had been softer, her judgments less absolute. But Oakwood Creek, it demanded vigilance. It was an investment. Richard always reminded her, their biggest asset. Protecting that asset became intertwined with protecting a certain idea of life, an image of peaceful, prosperous, homogeneous tranquility. The rules, initially just guidelines, had become rigid structures supporting the fragile edifice of her own sense of purpose. Enforcing them gave her a feeling of agency, of importance, that had slowly eroded elsewhere in her life. The velvet glove she metaphorically wore over her iron fist had long since frayed, revealing the unyielding metal beneath. The whispers didn't escape her. Of course, HOA Karen. She'd overheard it once, hissed between 2 neighbors she'd just cited for unapproved garden gnomes. The name stung, a crude, dismissive label for what she considered essential civic duty. Karen, a pejorative for women who dared to speak up, who demanded standards, who weren't afraid to enforce the rules everyone had agreed to. They didn't understand the burden she carried, the constant vigilance required to maintain the delicate ecosystem of Oakwood Creek. They enjoyed the manicured lawns, the quiet streets, the rising property values, but they chafed at the small sacrifices required. They were weak, content to let things slide, oblivious to the slow creep of disorder that would follow. She was the bulwark against that decay. If that made her a Karen in their small minds, so be it. She wore their resentment like a badge of honor, proof of her effectiveness. Her gaze snagged, sharpened, movement, fluid and rhythmic, across the street. A jogger. Male. He was, heading down Sycamore Lane, his pace steady, relaxed. Not a sprint, just an easy lope. Athletic build, dressed in dark shorts and a simple gray t-shirt, earbuds in place. Nothing inherently suspicious about a jogger, even at this early hour, except he was unfamiliar. Utterly. Carol prided herself on knowing every resident, every regular visitor, every pool cleaner and landscaper who had legitimate business within the bounds of Oakwood Creek. She mentally flipped through her internal Rolodex of faces, cross-referencing against HOA directories and memories from the sparsely attended monthly meetings. Blank. And he was black. The observation registered not as a neutral descriptor but as an anomaly, a data point that didn't fit the established pattern. Oakwood Creek was comfortable, familiar, predominantly white. Yes, a fact Carol didn't consciously celebrate, but which contributed to the neighborhood's sense of predictable stability. In her mind, she wouldn't say that, of course. If challenged, she would bristle with indignation, trot out well-rehearsed lines about judging people by character, not color. But deep down, in the unexamined basement of her beliefs, difference equaled disruption. Unfamiliarity bred suspicion. And this man, jogging with casual confidence through her streets, was the embodiment of both. He didn't belong. The thought wasn't reasoned. It was instinctual, visceral, springing from a place of cultivated fear and ingrained bias. Why was he here? This wasn't a thoroughfare. Sycamore Lane looped back onto Maple Avenue, forming a quiet residential circuit. People didn't just pass through Oakwood Creek on a morning run, unless they lived here or were visiting someone. And she knew everyone, didn't she? Her mind, a well-oiled machine for generating worst-case scenarios involving rule infractions, shifted gears. The possibilities it presented were darker now. Was he looking for open garage doors, unlocked cars, noting security systems, or lack thereof? Casing houses, the term, picked up from crime shows and sensational local news reports, landed heavily in her thoughts. He looked fit, strong, capable of what? Her pulse quickened. A familiar thrum of adrenaline that usually accompanied spotting a lawn exceeding the 3-inch limit, but amplified, sharpened with a prickle of genuine fear. However unfounded, he reached the corner of Maple Avenue. Pausing briefly to stretch his calves against the curb, he glanced around, perhaps checking for traffic, perhaps just taking in the morning. To Carol, watching from behind the pristine glass of her bay window, the innocent action morphed into sinister surveillance. He was scanning, calculating. His relaxed posture seemed like a facade, his casual attire a disguise. Dangerous. The word pulsed in her mind, insistent, drowning out reason. It felt true because it felt threatening to her established order, her sense of who should and shouldn't be present. He resumed his jog, turning onto Maple, disappearing behind the meticulously trimmed hedges of the Davies property, gone from sight, but not from Carol's agitated mind. The image lingered, the unfamiliar black man, moving through her territory, unchecked, unvetted, an unknown variable in her carefully controlled equation. She couldn't let it go. It wasn't just about rules anymore. This felt different. This felt like a threat to safety, to the community, to the values Oakwood Creek represented. Her responsibility as HOA president was clear. She had to act, protect the residents, maintain order. What if she was planning something? What if, hours later, news broke of a burglary, or worse? She would never forgive herself for not intervening, for not trusting her instincts, her gut feeling, honed by years of spotting minor infractions, screamed that this was wrong. This man was out of place, abandoning the cold coffee. She moved swiftly to the kitchen counter, her hand slightly unsteady as she reached for her smartphone. The smooth, cool glass felt alien in her suddenly clammy palm. Her breath hitched. Was she overreacting? A flicker of doubt quickly extinguished. No, better safe than sorry, always. She pictured the relief on her neighbors' faces when they learned she had averted potential disaster. She imagined the grudging respect replacing the usual eye rolls. She was the protector. Her fingers tapped the screen, dialing the 3 digits that felt both powerful and perilous. 911-911. What is your emergency? The dispatcher's voice was female, calm, thought professional, unnervingly detached. Carol took a steadying breath, trying to project authority and urgency, pushing down the tremor in her voice. Yes. Hello, my name is Carol Miller. I'm the HOA president for the Oakwood Creek neighborhood. I need to report a suspicious individual. Okay, Miss S. Miller. What is the location? Oakwood Creek. He was just jogging down Sycamore Lane, turned onto Maple Avenue. He's heading deeper into the neighborhood. And what is the individual doing that appears suspicious? Here it was. The justification. She had to make them understand the threat. Well, he's lurking. The word felt right, loaded with insinuation. He's running, yes, but he keeps looking at the houses, slowing down, looking around. I've never seen him before. He doesn't live here. Can you describe him, ma'am? He's a black man, Carol said, letting the descriptor hang in the air, imbued with the weight of her suspicion. Probably mid-30s, maybe older. Hard to tell. Athletic build. He's wearing dark clothing. She conveniently forgot the specific gray of his T-shirt. Dark clothing sounded more menacing, more fitting for someone lurking. He just looks very suspicious, out of place. Frankly, he looks dangerous. There, she'd said it. The word that echoed her deepest, unacknowledged fear. Ma'am, when you say dangerous, what specifically did you observe? Did he threaten anyone? Is he armed? Is he attempting to enter property? The dispatcher's questions were routine, designed to elicit concrete facts. Facts. Carol didn't have facts, only feelings, suspicions magnified by prejudice. He just looks it, she insisted, frustration making her voice shrill. The way he's moving, scanning everything, it looks shifty, like he's planning something. This is a very quiet, very safe neighborhood. We pay high property taxes to live here. We don't tolerate suspicious characters wandering our streets. He could be armed. For all I know, you need to send officers immediately. MAAM jogging in a neighborhood isn't illegal, the dispatcher stated patiently, a hint of weariness creeping into her tone. Unless he's actively committing a crime or trespassing. Isn't looking dangerous enough, Carol interrupted, her voice rising in pitch. The implication that her judgment was being questioned ignited her indignation. He doesn't belong here. Can't you understand? Send the police. Now, before something happens. The dispatcher sighed audibly. Okay, Mrs. Miller, we'll dispatch a unit to check the area. Can you give me your address and phone number again? Carol rattled off the information, her heart pounding with a mixture of fear and righteous vindication. She had done it. She had alerted the authorities. She was taking action. The dispatcher continued asking for more details, direction of travel, exact clothing descriptions, but Carol offered little more than repeated assertions of the man's suspicious nature, his unfamiliarity, his race, and the nebulous sense of danger she felt. Reluctantly, the dispatcher coded the call "suspicious person," standard procedure. But Carol's insistence, her near hysteria, the emphasis on dangerous, potentially armed, and the location, an affluent, influential neighborhood known for demanding rapid response, triggered internal flags. Standard procedure sometimes bent under the weight of perceived urgency or resident influence. The dispatcher added a note reflecting the caller's agitation and claims. This note, combined with the location and the potentially armed embellishment, bumped the call's priority. Unbeknownst to Carol, a nearby SWAT team, wrapping up a training exercise and already mobilized, received the alert. Given the reported potential for danger in a high-profile area, protocol dictated a more robust response than a single patrol car. Multiple units, including the armored vehicle and heavily armed officers, were rerouted. Carol hung up, her breath coming in short gasps. A wave of relief washed over her, quickly followed by anticipation. She hurried back to her bay window, peering down Maple Avenue. Any minute now, the flashing blue and red lights would slice through the morning calm. Order would be restored. The interloper would be confronted, questioned, likely escorted out of Oakwood Creek. It would serve as a necessary example. This was her neighborhood, and she would keep it safe, pristine, and predictable. She smoothed her blouse, feeling a surge of self-importance. She had done her duty. Meanwhile, Marcus Bell let the rhythm of his feet on the pavement and the steady beat pulsing through his earbuds clear the lingering cobwebs of sleep. The quiet suburban streets, bathed in the gentle morning sun, were a world away from the classified briefings, strategic planning sessions, and the constant, crushing weight of command that defined his days. Jogging was his sanctuary, a necessary ritual to decompress, to think, or sometimes, blessedly, not to think at all. He was still acclimating to the area, having moved into a rented house on the periphery of Oakwood Creek just a few months prior. The location was convenient, a relatively short commute to the nearby military base where he oversaw a multi-agency anti-terrorism task force. Anonymity was a rare and precious commodity in his life, and these quiet morning runs offered a fleeting taste of it. Here, he wasn't General Marcus Bell, four-star general of the United States Army, decorated combat veteran, advisor to presidents, leader responsible for thousands of lives and critical national security operations. Here, he was just a guy in shorts and a t-shirt, trying to stay fit, enjoying the peace before the storm of the day began. The t-shirt, ironically, bore the faded logo of the Army 10-miler, a race he'd run years ago, a small, personal nod to his world, meaningless to the casual observer. He rounded the corner onto Maple Avenue, appreciating the shade from the mature trees. That's when he saw the first patrol car, cruising slowly towards him, lights flashing but siren silent. Odd for this time of morning in such a placid neighborhood. He slowed his pace instinctively, curious but not alarmed. Maybe a fender bender, or a false alarm from someone's home security system. Then a second car appeared, pulling up behind the first. Then a third, turning onto the street from the other end. The low growl of a heavier engine followed, and suddenly, impossibly, a black armored vehicle, unmistakably SWAT, lumbered into view, stopping perhaps 50 yards ahead. Its menacing silhouette seemed utterly incongruous against the backdrop of cheerful flower beds and quaint porch swings. Doors opened. Figures clad in black tactical gear emerged, helmets obscuring faces. Weapons, rifles, not sidearms, held in a low, ready position. They fanned out slightly, their movements economical, professional, and unnervingly focused. Focused on him. General Bell stopped jogging altogether. Confusion warred with a sudden, cold spike of adrenaline, the ingrained reaction of a soldier assessing an unexpected threat. But he was the threat. His mind raced, discarding possibilities. Was there a suspect nearby they mistook him for? A genuine emergency unfolding he hadn't perceived. He, slowly, deliberately raised his hands, palms facing forward. A universal gesture of non-aggression, learned on vastly different streets than these. Years of training kicked in. Stay calm. Comply. Assess. Sir, keep your hands where we can see them. The voice, amplified slightly, cut through the unnatural silence that had fallen over the street, sharp, authoritative, tense, from her window. Carol watched, her heart hammering against her ribs. Vindication. There they were. The police. The SWAT team. They had found him. Look how many officers it took. See how dangerous he must be. A thrill, sharp and potent, surged through her. She knew it. Her instincts had been right all along. She quickly grabbed her HOA President lanyard from the hall table. The plastic card bearing her name and title felt reassuringly solid, and slipped on the navy blazer she kept ready for meetings. Her symbols of authority. She needed to be seen, to be recognized as the one who sounded the alarm. The vigilant guardian. She hurried outside, eager for a front row seat to the resolution, walking briskly down her driveway and onto the sidewalk, keeping what she deemed a safe but observable distance from the unfolding drama. She saw the officers advancing cautiously towards the black man. He stood perfectly still, hands raised, his expression obscured by distance, but his posture radiating an unusual calm. He didn't look panicked, or defiant, or cornered. He looked puzzled, confused, almost. Carol frowned. Why wasn't he resisting? Why didn't he look more threatening up close? The SWAT team leader, Captain Eva Rostova, moved to the front. Her movements were measured, her focus intense. Years on the force, including time in high-risk units, had honed her ability to read situations quickly, to de-escalate when possible, to command when necessary. The call had come in coded high priority, suspicious individual, potentially armed, affluent neighborhood, agitated caller emphasizing danger. Protocol demanded a cautious approach. Yet, as she got closer, something felt off. The man didn't fit the profile of a desperate burglar or a lurking threat. His eyes, when they met hers, weren't filled with fear or malice, but with a steady, intelligent clarity. His composure under the sudden appearance of heavily armed officers was remarkable. "Sir," Rostova called out, her voice firm but controlled, stopping her team a respectful distance away. "We've received a report of a suspicious individual in this area, possibly casing homes. You match the description provided." The man lowered his hands slowly, never breaking eye contact. "Officer, I can assure you, there's been a misunderstanding. I'm simply out for my morning jog. I live nearby." He paused, then added with quiet authority, "General Marcus Bell, United States Army." The name struck Captain Rostova like a physical blow. General Marcus Bell, the four-star general, head of the Regional Anti-Terrorism Task Force. She'd seen him speak at a joint LEO military briefing downtown just 6 months ago. She recognized the name instantly. And now, seeing him clearly, she recognized the man himself, the disciplined bearing, despite the casual clothes, the sharp intelligence in his eyes, the air of command that even jogging attire couldn't fully conceal. Her mind scrambled, replaying the dispatcher's notes: black man, lurking, dangerous, potentially armed. A wave of nausea mixed with professional fury washed over her. They had mobilized SWAT, weapons drawn, on one of the nation's highest-ranking military officers because he was jogging while black in his own neighborhood. General Bell, she repeated, the name tasting like ashes in her mouth. She immediately lowered her rifle, signaling sharply to her team behind her. "Stand down! Stand down!" The command crackled through the tense air. Weapons were lowered, stances relaxed, but confused murmurs rippled through the officers. Rostova took a step forward, her face grim behind her protective glasses. "General, my profound apologies, sir. There appears to have been a serious error, a false report." Carol, observing from the sidewalk, couldn't hear the exchange clearly, but she saw the unthinkable happen. The SWAT officers lowered their weapons. They relaxed. They weren't handcuffing him. They weren't even questioning him forcefully. What was going on? Were they incompetent? Intimidated? Fury, hot and blinding, surged through her. This was unacceptable. She, Carol Miller, HOA President, had reported a dangerous individual, and these officers were just chatting with him. Indignation propelled her forward, ignoring the invisible perimeter the officers had implicitly established. She marched towards the group, her blazer flapping, her lanyard swinging like a metronome marking her righteous anger. "What is the meaning of this?" Carol demanded, her voice sharp, strident, cutting through the suddenly diffused tension. She puffed out her chest, planting her hands on her hips. "Why haven't you arrested this man? I am Carol Miller, President of the Oakwood Creek Homeowners Association. I am the one who called 911. He was lurking, looking in windows, acting suspiciously. He doesn't belong here." Captain Rostova spun around, her expression instantly hardening from professional apology to icy anger. The transformation was startling. "Ma'am, step back. Now, this situation is under control." "Under control," Carol scoffed, gesturing emphatically towards General Bell, who now turned his gaze fully upon her. His expression was a complex mixture: disbelief, profound weariness, and a flicker of something that might have been pity. "He's clearly the person I reported. I told you he was dangerous. Why are you listening to his lies?" She pointed a trembling finger directly at the general. "MAAM, Captain Rostova said, her voice dropping low, each word clipped and heavy with authority. "This dangerous individual, the man you reported for lurking, is General Marcus Bell of the United States Army. He is a resident of this community. He was, as he stated, jogging." The words hit Carol like a physical force, stealing her breath. General, United States Army, resident. It didn't compute. Her mind refused to reconcile the image, the black man in simple workout clothes, with the title, the rank, the authority. Generals were figures from the news, usually older, usually. Her thoughts snagged on the unspoken white. This man, standing calmly amidst a SWAT team she had summoned, couldn't possibly be a general. That's impossible," she sputtered, her face flushing a blotchy, furious red. Denial surged, desperate and irrational. "He's lying. Did you even check his identification?" "How do you know?" "MAAM, Rostova interrupted, stepping closer, her voice dangerously quiet now. Several neighbors had emerged from their homes, drawn by the commotion. their faces mirroring a mixture of curiosity and alarm. Someone was holding up a smartphone, recording. "We know who General Bell is. He is one of this nation's most senior military leaders. He coordinates with law enforcement on matters far exceeding HOA regulations. The only suspicious activity here, Miss S. Miller, appears to be the grossly inaccurate and potentially malicious report made to emergency services." General Bell finally spoke, his voice calm, measured, yet carrying an undeniable weight that seemed to silence the very air around them. "MAAM, he addressed Carol directly, his gaze holding hers. "I was simply getting some exercise before starting my workday. Was there a specific reason my presence, my jogging, in this neighborhood caused you such alarm that you felt it necessary to call 911 and describe me as dangerous?" The ground felt unsteady beneath Carol's sensible flats. The protective shell of her self-righteousness cracked, then shattered. All eyes were on her, the stern-faced captain, the bewildered SWAT officers, General Bell with his quietly penetrating gaze, and now, her neighbors. Their whispers were suddenly audible, laced with shock and dawning comprehension. The phone camera remained steadily pointed in her direction. The full, horrifying reality crashed down. She hadn't just reported a suspicious person. She had profiled a black man. She had lied, embellishing his actions. She had called the police, triggering a SWAT response on a 4-star Army general because he was jogging in her neighborhood. I didn't know who he was," she stammered, the words tumbling out, weak and defensive. Her carefully constructed authority evaporated like mist. He looked out of place. "I was concerned. For safety, for the community. Concerned. Miss S. Miller." Captain Rostova cut her off sharply, her tone leaving no room for excuses or prejudice. "You told the 911 dispatcher he was lurking. Shifty. Dangerous. Possibly armed. You based this assessment on what? His race. The fact you didn't recognize him. You initiated a high-priority emergency response, mobilizing multiple units, including SWAT, diverting significant resources based on unfounded suspicions rooted in bias. That, ma'am, is the definition of filing a false police report. It's a serious offense." Carol's face drained of color, leaving her skin pasty white beneath the harsh morning sun. "No, that's not. I wasn't. I just felt." Her voice trailed off, pathetic even to her own ears. "Miss S. Miller," Rostova said, her professional demeanor firmly back in place. Though her eyes remained hard, she nodded to 2 patrol officers who had moved closer. "We need you to come with us. We need to take your formal statement regarding the 911 call and the false report." The 2 officers stepped forward, flanking Carol. One reached gently but firmly for her arm. "What? Arrest me," Carol shrieked, pulling back instinctively, swatting at the officer's hand with surprising weakness. The idea was ludicrous, insulting. "You can't arrest me. I'm the HOA President. I was performing my civic duty. I was trying to protect this neighborhood." Her protests were futile, dissolving into incoherent sputtering as the officers expertly and dispassionately secured her hands behind her back with handcuffs. The cold metal clicked shut, the sound unnaturally loud in the stunned silence that had enveloped Maple Avenue. Neighbors gasped audibly. The person filming zoomed in, capturing the raw disbelief, the dawning terror, the utter humiliation etched onto Carol Miller's face. General Bell watched the scene unfold, his expression unreadable, though a deep, almost imperceptible sigh escaped his lips. He closed his eyes for a brief moment, a flicker of profound weariness crossing his features before settling back into stoic composure. This was not how he had envisioned starting his day, facing down prejudice instead of planning strategic defenses. As Carol Miller, the self-proclaimed guardian of Oakwood Creek, was led, stumbling and protesting, towards the waiting patrol car, the flashing lights reflecting off her tear-streaked face and the pristine facades of the houses she swore to protect. The true cost of her vigilance began to sink in. The ugly reality of prejudice, hidden behind manicured lawns and stringent rules, had been laid bare for all to see. The video, uploaded before Carol even reached the station, exploded online. Hashtag HOA Karen on steroids. Hashtag General Bell jogging. Oakwood Creek shame. The carefully curated image of Oakwood Creek shattered, replaced by notoriety. The hours that followed were a blur of cold, hard surfaces and colder, harder truths for Carol. The sterile interrogation room felt miles away from her comfortable, controlled existence. Her initial bluster and attempts at justification, portraying herself as a victim of circumstance, a concerned citizen, railroaded by an overzealous officer, and an unfortunate misunderstanding, crumbled under the weight of the evidence. The playback of her own voice on the 911 call was damning. The tight panic, the repeated emphasis on race, the unfounded assertion of danger. Captain Rostova's precise, unemotional statement laid bare the facts. The potential charges were read out: filing a false police report, misuse of emergency services, a significant charge, given the SWAT deployment, and, pending the district attorney's review, a possible hate crime enhancement, given the clear racial bias motivating the call. But I didn't mean it that way, she wept, genuine tears now carving paths through her expensive foundation. The indignant fury had curdled into a thick, nauseating fear. I was just scared. He didn't look like he belonged. And who gets to decide who belongs in a neighborhood? Mrs. Miller. Detective Harding's quiet question landed like a stone. Is there an approved resident profile in the HOA bylaws? Does it specify jogging routes based on skin color? No, never. We don't discriminate. The protest sounded flimsy, even to her. Memories surfaced. Casual remarks at neighborhood potlucks. Unspoken assumptions in HOA decisions. The subtle but persistent exclusion of the few non-white families on the fringes of the development. She had always rationalized it, smoothed it over, told herself it was about preserving community character or maintaining standards. Now, stripped of her authority and facing the stark reality of her actions, the self-deception felt like cheap cellophane, easily torn away. Her husband, Richard, arrived looking bewildered and utterly lost. His usual detachment from her HOA battles shattered. Posting bail wasn't immediate. The severity of the potential charges, amplified by the victim's status and the viral nature of the incident, necessitated a judge's review. Carol spent the night in a county holding cell. The fluorescent lights hummed relentlessly, casting harsh shadows. The thin mattress smelled faintly of disinfectant and despair. The distant shouts and metallic clang of cell doors were the antithesis of Oakwood Creek's enforced quiet. Stripped of her blazer, her lanyard, her carefully constructed identity, she was just another inmate, facing the raw, terrifying consequences of her choices. The iron-dot fist felt very far away now, leaving only a trembling, vulnerable hand. Meanwhile, the incident reverberated far beyond Oakwood Creek. General Bell, reluctantly, issued a formal statement through his public affairs office, calm, dignified, emphasizing his service, expressing disappointment but urging respect for the legal process. Privately, The encounter left a deeper mark. It wasn't the first time he'd faced prejudice, but the blatant absurdity of it, being treated as a dangerous suspect while jogging in his own neighborhood. The place he'd chosen for its perceived tranquility was profoundly jarring. It underscored a grim truth: his rank, his uniform, his lifetime of service to the nation were not, in the end, armor against the insidious persistence of racism. Messages of support poured in from the Pentagon, from senators, even a brief call from the White House. But it was the emails and messages from young service members of color, sharing their own experiences, thanking him for his composure. That resonated most deeply, reminding him of the other battles still being fought daily, far from any war zone. Within Oakwood Creek, chaos reigned. The HOA board convened an emergency virtual meeting, the remaining members reeling from the scandal. Carol was immediately, unanimously suspended. A hastily drafted public apology condemning racial profiling and affirming inclusivity was released. But it landed flat, perceived as too little, too late. The incident wasn't just about Carol. It exposed a fault line running through the community, a culture of exclusivity and implicit bias that many had ignored or tacitly accepted. Heated arguments erupted on the neighborhood Facebook group. Defenders of Carol citing safety concerns clashed with residents expressing deep shame and demanding fundamental changes to the HOA's power structure and enforcement mentality. Property values. The sacred cow of Oakwood Creek suddenly felt vulnerable. The pristine facade had cracked wide open. Captain Rostova, back at her desk after filing her report, felt a lingering disquiet. She replayed the initial moments of the confrontation in her mind: the tension, the drawn weapons, the potential for catastrophic escalation. If Belle hadn't been so calm, so instantly recognizable to her, what might have happened? The thought sent a chill down her spine. She'd done her job, followed protocol based on the information received. But the source of that information, a panicked call fueled by blatant prejudice, had nearly led them to disaster. It was a stark reminder of the responsibility they carried and the dangerous consequences when citizens weaponized 911 based on fear and bias. One neighbor, Bill Davison, a white man in his late 50s who lived 2 doors down from Carol, watched the news report that evening with a knot in his stomach. He'd seen the commotion that morning, seen the black man jogging earlier, noted his unfamiliarity with a fleeting flicker of the same suspicion Carol had acted upon. He hadn't done anything, of course, hadn't felt threatened, but the seed of out of place had been there. Seeing Carol handcuffed, learning the jogger was a decorated general, forced a deeply uncomfortable self-reflection. Had he become complacent? Had the insular nature of Oakwood Creek, the endless focus on trivial rules and aesthetic conformity, subtly poisoned his own perceptions? He felt a vicarious shame, a sense of complicity in the culture that allowed Carol's prejudice to flourish and escalate so dangerously. He resolved to attend the next HOA meeting, the first he'd bother with in years. Carol's release on bail was a media frenzy. Hounded by reporters, shielded by a stressed Richard, she scurried into their car, face hidden. Home was no refuge. It was a fishbowl. Curtains twitched as she walked up the driveway. Former friends crossed the street to avoid her. The HOA board formally demanded her resignation. The lawsuit notifications began arriving, first from General Bell, represented by a prominent civil rights firm, seeking damages for defamation, emotional distress, and racial profiling. Then a class action suit from neighbors, citing damage to the community's reputation and property values, naming both Carol and the HOA itself. The legal battle was swift and brutal. The district attorney pursued the charges vigorously, including the hate crime enhancement. The evidence was overwhelming. Summaries of the trial dominated local news. Snippets of testimony were widely shared. Prosecutor, Miss S. Miller. When you told the 911 operator the man looked dangerous, what specific action had you observed? Carol, voice trembling, he was looking at the houses and running. I didn't know him. Prosecutor, looking at houses while jogging on a public street. Is that inherently dangerous? Carol, in this neighborhood, it felt wrong. He didn't belong. Prosecutor, didn't belong based on. Carol, silence, then muttering he was unfamiliar. Prosecutor, unfamiliar. Mrs. Miller, or black. Defense attorney, objection. Counsel is leading the witness. Judge, sustained. Rephrase. Miss Davies. Prosecutor, Miss S. Miller. Did you mention the jogger's race multiple times to the 911 operator? Carol, well, yes. To describe him. Prosecutor, did you describe his gray t-shirt, his specific brand of running shoes? Or did you focus on his race and your feeling that he was dangerous? General Bell's testimony was concise, powerful, delivered with quiet dignity. He spoke of the shock, the confusion, and the deep disappointment that such prejudice persisted. He stated, clearly he did not seek retribution, but accountability, hoping the incident could serve as a catalyst for change. Carol's own testimony was disastrous, defensive, tearful, contradictory. Her attempts to portray herself as a concerned community member acting in good faith rang hollow against the stark recording of her panicked, biased 911 call. The verdict was swift, guilty, on all counts, including the hate crime enhancement. The sentence stunned many with its severity, yet felt profoundly just to those who saw the incident as a symbol of systemic issues. The judge cited the egregious waste of resources, the potential for lethal consequences, the clear evidence of racial bias, and the insult to a dedicated public servant. Carol Miller was sentenced to 1 year in county jail. Significant fines were levied. Mandatory participation in intensive diversity and racial sensitivity. Counseling was ordered, along with extended probation upon release. The financial fallout was catastrophic. Legal fees, combined with the substantial settlements from the civil suits, decimated the Millers' finances. They were forced to sell the house in Oakwood Creek, the very domain Carol had, ruled with such misplaced fervor. Their carefully curated life dissolved. Carol's year in jail was a crucible. Stripped of status, surrounded by the harsh realities of lives vastly different from her own, the rigid certainty that had defined her began to erode, replaced by fear, shame, and a gnawing emptiness. The arrogant HOA Karen was broken, though whether true understanding or just self-pity took root remained unseen. Oakwood Creek slowly began to heal, but the scars remained. The HOA underwent radical changes, new leadership, revised bylaws focusing on community building over petty enforcement, mandatory board training. Bill Davison became an active board member, pushing for inclusivity initiatives. Property values eventually stabilized, but the neighborhood's reputation was forever altered. General Marcus Bell continued his distinguished service. The incident, a footnote, yet a persistent reminder of the invisible battles fought daily against ignorance and fear. He rarely thought of Carol Miller, but when he did, it was with a somber sense of waste. Carol Miller, upon release, moved away, her name a shorthand for weaponized privilege and the devastating consequences of prejudice. Dialing 911. The manicured lawns of Oakwood Creek still gleamed in the morning sun, but the echo of that single, biased phone call served as a permanent warning. True community safety blossoms from respect and inclusion, not suspicion and walls built of fear. The reign of HOA Karen was over, leaving behind a cautionary tale etched into the very fabric of the neighborhood she once tried to control.